In the 15th century, gazing upon the vast, uncharted ocean meant confronting an unfathomable void. Without maps or navigation tools, a return journey was never guaranteed. The sea was a colossal enigma, its immense waters acting as formidable barriers that constrained the world. Yet, within a single century, these very obstacles transformed into global arteries, ushering in the age of exploration. This period, from the early 1400s to the late 1600s, ignited what we now call globalization. It linked continents, diversified diets, reshaped cultures, and fundamentally altered geopolitical power dynamics. Remarkably, the pioneers of this worldwide transformation were not initially dominant powers. They emerged as the most improbable catalysts for such monumental change. At the dawn of the 15th century, Europe was far from the global powerhouse it would later become. It was a disjointed and often quarreling region. Compared to the dazzling prosperity of Ming China, the formidable Ottoman Empire, or the wealthy kingdoms of West Africa, Europe seemed like a distant, struggling periphery. However, Europeans harbored a deep desire for exotic goods. The world's riches predominantly traversed the ancient Silk Road. Obtaining fine silks from China or precious jewels from India meant relying on an extensive network of camel caravans winding across Asia. By the time these coveted items reached the eastern Mediterranean, the powerful maritime cities of Venice and Genoa held absolute sway over their distribution. These Italian republics then sold the goods to the rest of Europe at exorbitant prices, commanding substantial profits. The ultimate treasure was spices, pepper, cinnamon, and cloves. A single sack of these could fetch a king's ransom. To acquire them, one had to pay significant fees to a chain of Arab, Turkish, and Italian intermediaries, further inflating their cost. Meanwhile, situated at the extreme edge of the known world, lay the small kingdom of Portugal. This nation, economically modest and geographically isolated, was squeezed between its rival Castile and the daunting, unexplored expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. Blocked from eastward expansion and excluded from the lucrative Mediterranean spice trade, Portugal faced a desperate predicament. However, such dire straits often spark great ambition. To survive and flourish, Portugal recognized its urgent need to secure a direct supply of gold. This small nation, positioned at Europe's edge, became the unlikely launching point for a historical transformation, daring to navigate treacherous waters across half the globe. Crucially, Portugal also possessed strong political determination. A royal figure, Prince Henry, later known as the Navigator, relentlessly championed exploration. In 1415, Portugal seized Ceuta, a North African port. There, they witnessed caravans from the Sahara overflowing with gold and valuable spices. This encounter confirmed the immense wealth of the continent was completely bypassing them. Yet, for Henry, riches were only part of his motivation. Inspired by the Crusades, he sought to outmaneuver Eastern empires. His vision was a potent blend of devout religious conviction and raw material ambition. Henry himself rarely sailed, but he generously funded Lisbon's shipyards, acquiring the finest maps and mathematical tools to bypass middlemen and reach distant sources directly. Nevertheless, a significant psychological barrier loomed: the Sea of Darkness. Sailors genuinely believed that beyond Cape Bojador, the ocean boiled and winds prevented any return. In 1434, Captain Gil Enos bravely sailed past this dreaded cape, proving the ocean remained calm and shattering centuries of fear. His voyage broke a long-standing psychological barrier that had confined Europe. But upon his return, a new technical challenge emerged. Traditional Mediterranean ships proved ineffective against the powerful, consistent southbound winds of the open Atlantic. The innovative solution was the caravel. This light, shallow vessel featured triangular Arabian lateen sails, revolutionizing naval design. For the first time, European mariners could angle their sails to catch the wind, allowing them to tack and move forward against it. Mastering the winds, they devised a bold maneuver called the Volta do Mar. Instead of battling coastal headwinds, they sailed far out into the Atlantic, utilizing deep ocean currents to safely return to Lisbon. However, fully understanding and charting the complex Atlantic currents and wind patterns was a monumental task, that spanned many decades. As they advanced southward, the Portuguese began establishing fortified trading posts along the African coast. These outposts represented a volatile blend of commercial exchange and often violent encounters with local African kingdoms. It is here we confront a grim, defining aspect of this expansion: the dawn of the transatlantic slave trade. By 1444, the first documented shipment of enslaved Africans had already reached Portugal. This was no mere side note to the age of exploration. It became a foundational, dark pillar supporting the entire endeavor. The stark truth must be acknowledged. The vast wealth in sugar and gold pouring into Europe was built upon forced labor. Treating human lives as mere commodities funded their ambitious explorations, creating a cruel system that would displace millions. This horrific practice inflicted immeasurable suffering that would endure for centuries. Then, in 1453, a monumental shift occurred as the Ottoman Empire conquered Constantinople. This conquest effectively choked off the traditional overland routes to the east, rendering them incredibly dangerous and expensive. The Portuguese's patient coastal exploration of Africa suddenly transformed into a desperate, high-stakes quest. Their new imperative was to find a sea route around the continent, bypassing the blockade to reach India directly. However, as these voyages pushed deeper into uncharted waters, the brutal realities of survival became starkly apparent. Men endured constant exposure, sleeping drenched in salt water and subsisting on rotting meat and foul green water. Then came the silent, insidious killer: scurvy, which caused gums to blacken and old scars to tear open, leading to agonizing deaths. Despite the horrific conditions endured by the crew, those above deck approached exploration with detached, scientific precision. While astrolabes helped determine latitude, a critical gap remained. There was no method to accurately measure longitude at sea. To navigate the east-west void, they used dead reckoning, estimating speed from waves, combining it with hourglass timings and compass data. This method was an incredibly risky gamble, charting their course on a mostly blank map based on mere estimations. Every navigational detail was meticulously recorded in secret manuals called roteiros, fiercely guarded by monarchs with severe penalties. These were the 15th century equivalent of nuclear codes, with foreign spies constantly attempting to steal these invaluable guides. A pivotal moment arrived in 1488, when Captain Bartholomew Diaz ventured further south along the African coast than any European before him. A ferocious 13-day storm then swept his fleet violently off course, pushing them deep into the open, unknown ocean. After the tempest subsided, Diaz turned east, expecting the African coast, but saw only endless water. Realizing the storm had carried him past the continent's tip, he then turned north and finally sighted land. The coastline now stretched northeast, confirming he had rounded Africa's southern tip and connected the Atlantic and Indian Oceans. On his return, Diaz spotted the massive rocky peninsula they had passed, naming it Cabo das Tormentas, the Cape of Storms. However, King John II immediately grasped its monumental significance, renaming it the Cape of Good Hope, for it confirmed the sea route to Asia was now open. By 1492, a unified Spain, watching Portugal's success, became hungry for global wealth. This led Christopher Columbus to propose sailing west to Asia. His radical plan, however, was built on a massive mathematical error, severely underestimating the Earth's size. Portugal rejected him for his flawed calculations. Undeterred by Portugal's rejection, Columbus then presented his ambitious proposal to Spain. There, even the Spanish scholars initially deemed his calculations for the Earth's size utterly impossible. However, with Portugal leading the maritime race, Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand felt immense pressure. They decided to risk 3 small ships, banking on Columbus's questionable math for a potential breakthrough. Thus, on August 3rd, 1492, Columbus embarked on his historic voyage. With 87 men, he steered his fleet west, venturing into the vast, unknown ocean. Weeks turned into a grueling month, with no land in sight. The relentless westward winds instilled deep fear in the crew, who worried they could never sail back against them. As panic escalated and mutiny brewed, Columbus resorted to deception. He maintained two ship logs, one accurate and one falsified, showing a shorter distance to conceal their true progress. Finally, on October 12, 1492, after more than a month at sea, a lookout's cry pierced the anxious air. Land was spotted on the horizon. Columbus soon stepped ashore in the Bahamas, encountering the indigenous Taino people. Convinced he had reached the outer islands of Asia, he mistakenly labeled them Indians. He was profoundly mistaken. The land he had stumbled upon was an entirely new world to Europeans, already home to millions, and his mathematical error had led him directly to the Americas. The Spanish immediately planted their royal standards, claiming the newly found territory. Spotting gold ornaments on the Taino, Columbus envisioned funding his ultimate goal, a holy crusade. The mission swiftly devolved into exploitation, viewing natives as both souls to be converted and bodies to be forced into labor. The focus violently shifted to resource extraction. Spain then implemented the encomienda system, a legal construct that essentially enslaved indigenous populations. They were forced into brutal, unpaid labor in mines and plantations. Yet, the most devastating European weapon proved to be biological. Isolated for millennia, the Americas had no natural immunity to Old World diseases like smallpox and measles. European ships, unknowingly, became vessels of contagion, acting as floating biohazards. This biological onslaught triggered a demographic apocalypse across the continent. Within mere decades, entire civilizations crumbled, with over half the native population tragically wiped out. It stands as one of humanity's most severe historical disasters. However, this immense biological and cultural collision fundamentally reshaped the entire planet. Europeans introduced horses, pigs, and deadly diseases to the Americas. In exchange for what they brought, Europeans also acquired new agricultural treasures, like potatoes, maize, and cassava from the Americas. This unprecedented exchange of goods, diseases, and cultures was famously dubbed the Columbian Exchange by historian Alfred Crosby. These newly discovered calorie-dense superfoods proved incredibly resilient, flourishing in regions where traditional grains struggled to grow. Their widespread adoption fueled dramatic population surges across both Europe and Africa, eventually even tripling China's population. However, the news of Columbus's return voyage ignited an immediate political crisis, as Spain triumphantly declared they had found a direct route to Asia. The Pope quickly intervened, drawing a contentious boundary line that overtly favored Spain's territorial claims in the New World. Portugal, incensed by this threat to their hard-won trade monopoly, vehemently rejected the papal decree and began preparing for war. To avert a devastating conflict, the two rival nations decided to negotiate directly, culminating in the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494. They took a map and boldly drew a single vertical line straight down the center of the globe, dividing the newly explored territories. According to this agreement, all lands to the west of the line were claimed by Spain, while everything to the east belonged to Portugal. With just a stroke of a pen, these two European powers arbitrarily carved up the entire Earth, completely disregarding the millions already living there. Portugal, meanwhile, acknowledged Columbus brought back some gold and exotic plants, but critically, no precious spices. The real prize remained elusive, still waiting beyond Africa. Thus, in July 1497, Vasco da Gama was dispatched to finish the arduous task, undertaking an audacious maneuver armed with secret navigational charts. He deliberately steered his 4 vessels far from the familiar coast, plunging deep into the South Atlantic's vast emptiness to harness optimal winds. For 93 grueling days and 10,000 kilometers, they witnessed nothing but endless ocean, then battled fierce currents for a month to round the Cape of Good Hope. After battling currents around the Cape, they ventured into East African waters, a region entirely unknown to European navigators. Instead of an empty ocean, they discovered a thriving, sophisticated trade network connecting Africa, the Persian Gulf, and India. With the assistance of a local pilot, acquired in what is now Kenya, da Gama then skillfully navigated across the vast Arabian Sea. Finally, on May 20th, 1498, his ships dropped anchor in Calicut, India. marking the historic completion of the sea voyage. His initial encounter with the local ruler proved to be a profound cultural shock, especially when presenting his modest gifts of cloth, brass, and honey. These offerings were met with disdain by society accustomed to trading in luxurious silks and precious diamonds, making the Portuguese seem like crude pirates. Despite the palpable hostility, da Gama managed to secure a small amount of valuable spices using gold before their departure. However, the journey back became a catastrophic ordeal. He unwisely battled the Indian Ocean's powerful winds, ignoring local warnings. Disease decimated his crew, claiming half their lives, including his own brother, forcing him to abandon and burn one ship due to insufficient manpower. In September 1499, only a fraction of the original fleet limped back to Lisbon, with a staggering human cost. Just 55 survivors from 170 men. Yet, the small spice cargo yielded a profit 60 times the expedition's total cost, unequivocally proving the commercial viability of the new direct route to India. Soon after, Portugal expanded its ambitions, dispatching fleets across the Atlantic to claim Brazil and establish a lucrative sugar empire. This expansion led to the collapse of indigenous societies and a dramatic escalation of the transatlantic slave trade, condemning millions to brutal lives in the cane fields. Portugal soon grasped a harsh reality. They possessed nothing Asia truly desired, making fair trade competition impossible in the East. Their singular advantage was their robust, Atlantic-tested ships, which were essentially floating fortresses armed with powerful bronze cannons. Portugal lacked goods desirable to Asia, but possessed a crucial advantage: their robust, Atlantic-tested ships. These vessels were essentially floating fortresses, equipped with formidable bronze cannons. Returning in 1502, they came not as merchants, but as conquerors, employing brutal naval artillery. They bombarded coastal cities, sank entire fleets, and violently established a monopoly on a world that never welcomed them. As Portugal expanded its Eastern Empire, Spain was simultaneously reshaping the Americas. Cortés, with just 500 men, toppled the Aztec Empire, and Pizarro shattered the Inca with even fewer. Their unwavering motive was always the same: to extract immense wealth, primarily silver. By 1545, Potosi's silver flowed globally, transported across the Pacific via Manila galleons for direct trade with China. This unprecedented exchange permanently connected the Americas, Europe, Africa, and Asia into a single global system for the first time. The Catholic Church mirrored this global commerce with its own ideological invasion, as Jesuits charted souls, much like navigators mapped new coastlines. As the 16th century drew to a close, new rivals emerged, notably the Dutch, forming the world's first multinational corporation, the VOC. They shattered Portugal's monopoly, not by military force, but through a betrayal. A Dutch insider revealed secret navigation routes. This act effectively handed control of the Indian Ocean to northern Europe, as the English also planted imperial seeds in North America with Jamestown. The age of exploration ended once maps were complete, but the powerful global machine it unleashed never ceased. This era dramatically shaped the very fabric of our modern world, from nations to diseases. This isn't a comfortable truth, but it reminds us how courageous individuals unintentionally created our interconnected reality. For more stories of how the past shapes our present, like and subscribe.